Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive all about David Bohm and group dialogue. I'm really excited to explore this with you, especially since I know you're already interested in Bohm and this unique approach to communication.
Yeah, it's really a topic that's fascinating from an intellectual point of view, but also, I think, incredibly relevant to our lives even today.
Absolutely. For our deep dive today, we're going to be taking a look at an article called David Bohm and Group Dialogue, or The Interconnectedness of Everything by Naomi Grin.
Okay.
It was published in the Jewish Quarterly. And get this, the author actually knew David Bohm. She even met his wife, Cyril, totally by chance at an airport.
Wow. So a little serendipity
A
there.
little serendipity.
Exactly. It's actually a great example of one of Bohm's core ideas, this concept of undivided wholeness.
Okay.
David Bohm was a prominent physicist. As you know, he worked with Oppenheimer and was mentored by Einstein. And he believed that everything in the universe is interconnected in ways we may not always see.
That's so mind-blowing. But how does this idea of undivided wholeness actually play out in our lives? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I think one way to think about it is that it challenges us to look beyond the surface, to consider the deeper connections between seemingly separate events and individuals.
Yeah.
It suggests that our actions, no matter how small, have ripple effects throughout the web of existence.
So even a chance encounter at an airport could be part of a larger interconnected pattern.
Exactly.
That's
Well,
amazing.
and this idea is woven throughout Bohm's work, including his approach to communication, which he called group dialogue.
Yeah, so the article explains that Bohm actually developed group dialogue as a way to address what he saw as a breakdown of communication in society.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that actually looks like in practice?
Certainly, Bohm dialogue is really distinct from typical discussions or debates.
Right.
It's not about trying to win an argument or push your own agenda. Instead, it's about creating a space where participants can listen deeply to each other, suspend judgment, and explore different perspectives openly and with curiosity.
So it's less about trying to be right and more about trying to understand.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The goal is to allow for a free flow of meaning among participants, right?
Okay.
Where new insights and understandings can emerge from the collective intelligence of the group.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about like how often we get stuck in our own heads, clinging to our own opinions and viewpoints.
Yes. And Bohm believed that this tendency to cling to fixed positions was at the root of many of the conflicts and misunderstandings we experience, both personally and collectively.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in today's world, I think, where everyone seems to have such strong opinions about everything.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to break out of that sometimes.
But Bohm believed that true dialogue has the power to break through those barriers and create a space for genuine connection and understanding.
Yeah. So I'm starting to see how this all ties back to the idea of undivided wholeness, right?
Yeah.
If we're all interconnected, then it makes sense that we need to find ways to communicate more effectively, to listen more deeply, to understand each other's perspective.
Exactly. Bohm saw dialogue as a way to tap into that interconnectedness and to create a more harmonious and collaborative society.
But how did he actually put these ideas into practice? What did these group dialogues actually look like?
Well, the article describes kind of a key turning point in the development of what we know as Bohm dialogue today. And it involved a weekend retreat in 1984 that Bohm led.
Oh, okay.
It was called the Mickleton Weekend. And what was initially planned as a series of lectures spontaneously evolved into an extended group dialogue session.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like he wasn't afraid to let go of the plan and allow the process to unfold organically.
Exactly. Bohm recognized that true dialogue is an emergent process, something that can't be forced or controlled. It requires a willingness to be present, to listen without judgment, and to allow the conversation to take its own course.
That must have been quite an experience for the participants.
It certainly was. The Mickleton Weekend marked a significant shift in Bohm's approach and helped to solidify the principles of group dialogue as a distinct practice.
That's really interesting. It's interesting to see how a seemingly random event, like a spontaneous shift in plans, can lead to such a profound change.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most transformative experiences come from unexpected places, and it speaks to the importance of being open to the unexpected and embracing the emergent nature of life.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what happened after the Mickleton weekend? Did Bohm continue to develop and refine the practice of group dialogue?
He did, and he wasn't alone in this endeavor. Don Factor, a film producer and close friend of Bohm's, played a significant role in promoting and spreading Bohm dialogue.
Yeah, I remember reading about Don Factor in the article. Their first meeting sounds like something straight out of a movie. Didn't Factor initially approach Bohm for just like a quick consultation on a science fiction film?
That's right. Factor, who produced a film with Robert Altman, wanted Bohm's insights on a film project.
Oh, wow.
What he thought would be a quick chat turned into a 2-hour deep dive into the nature of science and communication.
Wow. That's quite the introduction to Bohm's world.
Indeed. And that conversation clearly had a profound impact on Factor. He became a dedicated advocate for Bohm dialogue. He started introducing the practice to various communities and organizations.
It sounds like Bohm had a knack for sparking these kinds of deep conversations, inspiring others to explore new ways of thinking and relating to the world.
Absolutely. His passion for dialogue was contagious, and he had a gift for making complex ideas accessible and engaging.
So how did Factor go about sharing Bohm dialogue with others?
Well, the article mentions that Factor and his wife, Anna, attempted to introduce the practice to an alternative community they were involved with. However, they faced some unexpected resistance.
Really? Why would anyone resist the idea of having more open and honest conversations?
It's a good question, and one that really goes to the heart of why Bohm believed dialogue could be subversive to organizations.
Subversive. That sounds a bit intense. Can you explain what he meant by that?
Sure. Bohm recognized that genuine dialogue can challenge existing power structures and assumptions within organizations.
Uh-huh.
When people start questioning the status quo and engaging in open, authentic communication, it can be disruptive, especially for those who benefit from maintaining control.
So it's not that dialogue is inherently destructive, but that it has the potential to shake things up and challenge the way things are usually done.
Precisely. And that can be threatening to those who are invested in maintaining the existing hierarchy or power dynamics.
That makes sense. It reminds me of the saying, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights the fact that genuine dialogue often requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and to be open to changing our minds.
Which isn't always easy. But the article also mentions a positive example of Bohm dialogue being used in a hospital in Denmark. Can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. In that case, dialogue actually helped resolve a crisis and improve the organization's functioning.
That's amazing. So it's not always about disruption and conflict. Dialogue can actually be a powerful tool for positive change and growth.
Absolutely. And it highlights Bohm's belief that collective intelligence can emerge when people are willing to listen deeply to each other without judgment.
It seems like there's a lot to unpack here. We've covered so much ground already, from Bohm's concept of undivided wholeness to the principles of group dialogue and the potential challenges and rewards of putting these ideas into practice.
It's just the tip of the iceberg. Bohm's work is incredibly rich and multifaceted, and his ideas continue to resonate with people today.
This has been a fascinating exploration so far, and we're not done yet. In part 2 of our deep dive, we'll delve deeper into Bohm's personal life and explore more examples of how group dialogue has been applied in various contexts.
It's a journey that will take us beyond the theoretical and into the practical applications of Bohm's ideas.
We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. You know, it's fascinating how Bohm's ideas about dialogue kind of challenged conventional thinking about communication and power dynamics. He saw dialogue as a force for positive change, but also acknowledged that it could disrupt the status quo.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that Bohm's own dialogue group eventually disbanded,
Right.
which kind of makes me wonder if even a group led by Bohm himself couldn't sustain itself indefinitely, what hope is there for the rest of us?
That's a fair question, but I think it's important to remember that Bohm didn't see dialogue as a static endpoint, but rather as an ongoing process of discovery and evolution.
Okay.
Even the most dedicated groups can experience shifts in dynamics and membership over time.
So it's less about achieving some kind of perfect state of communication and more about embracing the fluidity, the inevitable changes that come with any group dynamic.
Exactly, and that's where the real beauty of dialogue lies.
Yeah.
It's not about clinging to a fixed outcome or forcing agreement. It's about creating a space where individuals can authentically engage with each other, share their perspectives, and learn from the diversity of viewpoints within the group.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about letting go of the need to control the conversation and trusting that something meaningful can emerge from the process itself.
Precisely. Bohm believed that collective intelligence could arise from this kind of open and honest exchange of ideas. It's not about erasing differences or suppressing dissenting voices, but rather about harnessing the power of those differences to create something new and transformative.
Yeah, like we're creating a tapestry where each individual thread contributes to the richness and complexity of the overall design.
That's a beautiful analogy. And it highlights the importance of valuing diversity and recognizing that each person brings a unique perspective and set of experiences to the table.
But let's be realistic. Not every attempt at dialogue is going to be successful. As we heard earlier, even with the best intentions, there can be resistance, power struggles, and deeply ingrained biases that get in the way.
Absolutely. And that's why Bohm placed so much emphasis on the importance of suspending judgment,
Okay.
both of ourselves and others.
Right.
It's about noticing our own reactions, our own biases, and our own tendencies to cling to fixed positions, and then making a conscious effort to let go of those preconceived notions.
So it's not just about listening to others, but also about listening to ourselves. That adds a whole other layer of complexity to the process.
It certainly does. And it's a crucial aspect of creating a space where genuine dialogue can flourish. We need to be aware of our own internal dialogue, our own assumptions and prejudices, in order to truly listen to and understand others.
Yeah, it's like we're developing a new set of muscles, both for listening to ourselves and for listening to others.
Exactly. It's about building our capacity for empathy, understanding, and compassion. And that's not something that happens overnight. It requires ongoing practice and a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit when we're wrong, and to be open to changing our minds.
Yeah, it makes me think about all the times I've been so caught up in my own perspective that I've failed to truly listen to what the other person was saying.
Right.
It's humbling, but also incredibly liberating to realize that I don't always have to be right.
And that's a key insight. Bohm believed that our attachment to being right often prevents us from seeing the bigger picture and appreciating the validity of other perspectives.
Right.
Dialogue is about letting go of that need to be right and opening ourselves up to the possibility that we might learn something new, even from those we disagree with.
This all ties back to the concept of undivided wholeness, doesn't it? If we're all interconnected, then our individual understanding is necessarily limited.
Right.
We need each other to see the world more completely.
Precisely. And that's why dialogue is so powerful. It allows us to tap into the collective intelligence of the group and to gain insights that we wouldn't be able to access on our own.
But how do we actually put these ideas into practice in our daily lives?
Right.
It's one thing to talk about the principles of dialogue, but it's another thing entirely to live them out in our interactions with others.
It's true that it takes conscious effort to shift our communication patterns and to cultivate the habits of deep listening and suspending judgment. It starts with being more mindful of our own internal dialogue, noticing our reactions and judgments, and making a choice to pause before we react.
So it's about slowing down the conversation and becoming more aware of the thoughts and feelings that are shaping our responses.
Exactly. And it's also about asking clarifying questions, seeking to understand rather than to refute, and being willing to acknowledge when we don't have all the answers.
Yeah, that can be challenging, especially when we're dealing with people who hold very different viewpoints than our own.
Right.
It's easy to get defensive or to try to shut down the conversation entirely.
It certainly can be. But it's in those moments that the practice of dialogue is most crucial. It's about remembering that even in the face of disagreement, there's still an opportunity for connection and understanding.
It's about finding common ground, even if it's just a shared commitment to listening to each other with respect.
And that's a powerful starting point. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we have to agree with everything the other person is saying, but it does mean that we're willing to engage with their perspective in a genuine and open-minded way.
It sounds like a lot of work,
Yeah.
but I can see how the potential rewards, deeper connection, greater understanding, and even personal transformation would be worth the effort.
It's an ongoing journey for sure,
Yeah.
but it's one that can lead to a richer, more meaningful, and more interconnected life.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. But before we move on, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about Bohm's belief that dialogue can be subversive to organizations.
Right.
Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Of course. Bohm recognized that genuine dialogue can challenge existing power structures and assumptions within organizations. When people start questioning the status quo and engaging in open, authentic communication, it can be disruptive, especially for those who benefit from maintaining control.
So it's not that dialogue is inherently destructive, but that it has the potential to shake things up and challenge the way things are usually done.
Precisely. And that can be threatening to those who are invested in maintaining the existing hierarchy or power dynamics.
That makes sense. It reminds me of that quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off."
That's a great analogy. And it highlights the fact that genuine dialogue often requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and to be open to changing our minds.
Which isn't always easy. But the article also mentions a positive example of Bohm dialogue being used in a hospital in Denmark.
Right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. In that case, dialogue actually helped resolve a crisis and improve the organization's functioning.
That's amazing. So it's not always about disruption and conflict. Dialogue can actually be a powerful tool.
Absolutely. And it highlights Bohm's belief that collective intelligence can emerge when people are willing to listen deeply to each other without judgment.
I'm curious to learn more about how Bohm's own personal journey influenced his thinking about dialogue.
Okay.
The article mentions that he had a profound encounter with the Indian philosopher J. Krishnamurti.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that relationship and how it impacted Bohm's work?
Bohm and Krishnamurti engaged in extensive dialogues over many years,
No.
exploring topics like the nature of consciousness, the role of thought, and the search for meaning in a constantly changing world.
Oh, wow.
These conversations, which were later published as The Ending of Time, deeply influenced Bohm's thinking
Okay.
and helped him to see the limitations of purely scientific approaches to understanding reality.
It's fascinating that even a brilliant physicist like Bohm was open to learning from someone with a completely different perspective.
Right.
It speaks to his humility and his lifelong commitment to exploring new ideas.
Absolutely. Their dialogues challenged Bohm's assumptions about the nature of reality and helped him to develop a more holistic and integrated worldview.
Did their conversation specifically influence Bohm's ideas about dialogue?
They certainly did. Krishnamurti emphasized the importance of self-awareness, suspending judgment, and paying attention to the movement of thought. These themes became central to Bohm's approach to dialogue.
It makes me wonder if I'm missing opportunities for breakthroughs in my own life because I'm not truly listening. Have you ever experienced that?
Of course, we all fall into the trap of thinking we already know the answer or of clinging to our own perspectives. It's only through conscious effort and a willingness to be open to other viewpoints that we can truly engage in meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how much deeper this goes than simply having a polite conversation. It's about challenging ourselves to see the world through different lenses and to question our own assumptions.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that we're not isolated individuals, but rather interconnected beings with the capacity to learn, grow, and evolve together.
So in a way, dialogue is about much more than just communication. It's about tapping into our shared humanity and recognizing our interconnectedness.
And that's a powerful realization. It suggests that our individual choices and actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. When we engage in genuine dialogue, we're not just exchanging information, we're contributing to the creation of a more compassionate and interconnected world.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. It gives me hope that even in the face of so much division and conflict, we can still find ways to connect with each other and to build bridges of understanding.
And it all starts with each of us cultivating the qualities of deep listening, suspending judgment, and being willing to step outside of our comfort zones in order to connect with others on a more authentic and meaningful level.
This has been an incredibly rich and thought-provoking exploration of David Bohm's ideas about dialogue. But I know we're not finished yet. In our final segment, I'm eager to hear more about how these principles can be applied in our own lives and in the world around us.
We'll explore some practical examples and leave you with some inspiring ideas for incorporating dialogue into your own journey of personal and collective transformation.
Stay tuned for our final segment. Welcome back. I'm still thinking about how dialogue, as Bohm envisioned it, is so much more than just conversation. It's like a way of being in the world, a way of connecting with others, and even a path towards personal growth.
Right, yeah. It's about recognizing that true communication kind of goes beyond simply exchanging information. It's about creating a space where meaning can flow freely, understanding can deepen, and new insights can emerge.
And as we've discussed, it's not always easy, right?
Right.
It takes a conscious effort to cultivate the habits of deep listening, suspending judgment, being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Absolutely. It's a practice, an ongoing process of refinement and self-discovery, but the potential rewards are immense.
Speaking of rewards, I'm curious to hear more about how Bohm's ideas have been applied in real-world settings. Are there like examples of organizations or communities that have successfully implemented Bohm dialogue?
There are many inspiring examples, actually. In addition to the hospital in Denmark we mentioned earlier, Bohm dialogue has been used in a wide range of contexts, from businesses and educational institutions to conflict resolution and community building initiatives.
It's amazing to think that something that started as a physicist's exploration of communication could have such a wide-ranging impact. What are some of the like key benefits that people have experienced through engaging in Bohm dialogue?
Well, participants often report feeling more connected to each other, more understood, more open to different perspectives. They also describe, experiencing breakthroughs in communication, resolving longstanding conflicts, and even developing a greater sense of shared purpose.
Wow, it sounds like it could be incredibly transformative, both on a personal and a collective level.
It certainly can be, yeah. And it speaks to Bohm's belief that dialogue has the power to create a more harmonious and interconnected world.
But as we've discussed, there are also challenges and potential pitfalls, right?
Right.
How can we kind of navigate those difficulties and create the conditions for genuine dialogue to flourish?
Well, one key factor is establishing a shared intention or purpose for the dialogue.
Okay.
It's helpful to have some agreement on what the group is hoping to explore or accomplish.
So it's not just about getting together and talking randomly. There
Exactly.
needs to be some sense of direction or focus.
Exactly. And it's also important to create a space where participants feel safe and respected, where they can express themselves freely without fear of judgment or reprisal.
Yeah, that sounds crucial. If people don't feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings, then the whole process breaks down.
Absolutely. And that's where the skills of deep listening and suspending judgment come in.
Yeah.
It's about creating an atmosphere of trust and openness where everyone's voice is valued.
Are there any like specific techniques or practices that can help facilitate that kind of environment?
There are many approaches that can be helpful. One common practice is to establish guidelines for the dialogue,
Okay.
such as speaking from personal experience, listening without interrupting, and respecting confidentiality.
Those sound like simple but powerful guidelines. It's about creating a container for the conversation,
Yeah.
like a set of boundaries that allow everyone to feel safe and heard.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that dialogue is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of communication, but rather about continually striving to create the conditions for open and honest exchange.
So it's about embracing the messiness,
Yes,
the inevitable disagreements, and the challenges that come with any group dynamic.
absolutely. And it's about trusting that even in the midst of those challenges, something meaningful can emerge.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive. I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of David Bohm's ideas and the transformative potential of group dialogue. But, there's always more to learn and explore.
And that's the beauty of it. Dialogue is a never-ending journey of discovery and growth.
So where can our listeners go to learn more about Bohm dialogue and perhaps even experience it firsthand?
There are tons of resources out there. You can find books by David Bohm, articles and websites dedicated to Bohm dialogue, and even organizations that offer workshops and training programs.
That's wonderful. And perhaps the most important takeaway is that we can all start practicing dialogue in our own lives right here, right now.
Yes.
We can cultivate the habits of deep listening, suspending judgment, and seeking understanding in our everyday interactions with others.
Exactly. It's about making a conscious choice to shift our communication patterns and to create a more compassionate and interconnected world, one conversation at a time.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of David Bohm and group dialogue. I hope you found it insightful and inspiring. And remember, the power to transform our world lies within each of us. Let's choose dialogue, let's choose connection, and let's choose to create a more meaningful and harmonious future together.